overview, as she said, we've not actually worked in Puerto Rico, or certainly not significantly. So none of the examples that I'm going to give you today is specific to Puerto Rico, but I think what I've tried to do is collect kind of a lot of our general principles and then how we've applied them to other projects in other places, which hopefully will have a lot of overlap, or there'll be bits that are relevant to you and all of your work. So just a little bit about Build Change for those of you who don't know us. So we're a non-profit social enterprise that was founded in 2004 by our current CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Hauser, with the mission to prevent housing loss caused by disasters. Quite simple, and by doing that, we mobilize people, money, and technology to really try and transform the systems that are there for regulating, financing, building, and improving houses around the world. In the last 17 years, this has looked like lots of different things in terms of it being both pre-disaster as well as post-disaster. But there have been key things in our mission and what we do. So the buildings that we're focused on is housing. We have looked at some schools and a few other building types, but generally our key focus is housing, simply because this is generally where we see the biggest losses in terms of loss of life and also financial losses post-disaster. And then, as I said, when we work is both preventative before disasters happen and then afterwards as well in disaster reconstruction. In terms of which hazards we're looking at, generally it's any hazards that can be impacted by strengthening the building. So any hazards like volcanic eruptions or storm surge, tsunami, flooding. In some cases, generally it's better for relocation, but anything that we can strengthen the building for, so primarily hurricanes and earthquakes, is what we consider in our work. And then where we work is Asia, Pacific Islands, Latin America, the Caribbean, and most recently in the US. In terms of our Caribbean work, the large majority of it has been in Haiti. We've also had big programs in St. Martin and Dominica, which is actually how I joined Build Change. So I joined 4 years ago as a structural engineer, kind of focusing on this expansion in the Caribbean in response to Hurricanes Irma and Maria. And the most of the work that I've done has been post-disaster reconstruction programs in Dominica and St. Martin. So the first few slides and the first things I want to talk about is kind of Build Change's approach. And then I'll come on to give some case studies afterwards. To frame the approach, I wanted to show this quick graphic of what we consider resilient housing to be. Because disaster resistance is a huge part of that, and it's certainly the first point on there, but it's by no means everything. So generally what we're considering are aspects that relate to habitability, which I'll come on to talk to a bit more in later slides and with the case studies and things. But when I'm talking about this, it's things that make the housing affordable, what makes it locally appropriate, what makes it healthy and secure. You know, do they have access to water and sanitation? Is there adequate ventilation, lighting, space, security? And then also whether it can be expanded. So is it adaptable? Can it be expanded to fit growth and shifting demographics? Is it a financial asset? Do they run their business out of the home? Do they rent a room? Do they rent a whole floor of the home? Is it scalable? Can it be changed? And then finally, is it affordable? Is it sustainable? So the next few slides, then, there are kind of 4 key points that I want to make about how Build Change tries to address resilient housing in our programs and what we advocate for in everybody else's programs. So the first of these 4 is systems change, and this is really core to everything that we do, thinking that housing is not just a technology problem, it's not just a money problem, it's not just a people or a policy problem. Housing markets really sit at the center of all of these things. So starting with the people and the policy up at the top, this is really all about the demand. Somebody has to want the house to be safe and more resilient. They can't do that then if there's no money available for it. So in our programs, we look through different options in terms of public financing, private sector lending, and then philanthropic investment as well. And then the final piece to this pie is that, okay, the demand is there, the money is there, is the technology there? In terms of our quality building materials available, are good codes available for people to follow, are they adequately enforced, coming back to policy again? Is there a quality workforce? Are they good, well-qualified engineers, planners, architects, builders? And then are there digital tools that can be used to scale these programs? So this is the first key aspect to our approach to resilient housing, that it's the intersection of all of these things. The second then is that we have increasingly worked more and more with improving existing homes rather than new construction. It's not always the case, of course, there's room and need for both, but generally what we find everywhere that we've worked is that the qualitative housing deficits are much bigger than the quantitative housing deficits. So the need for improved homes is much bigger than the need for new homes. So qualitative improvements would be things like improving the structure, adding an inside bathroom, improving the kitchen, improving the lighting, adding a bedroom so that everybody has a space to sleep, that kind of thing, removing damp, removing mold, and that there's really a huge number of benefits to working with improving homes. I've listed some of them here. I think the first and in many ways the most obvious one is that it's more cost effective. It's a lot cheaper to work with what you have and add something to it rather than building new. We've recently done a big study looking at, I think it was about 1,500 designs of our past retrofit designs around the world, and we found that on average across all of them, our existing housing improvements cost 23% of our new construction equivalents. So, you know, just under a quarter of the cost is a huge difference. It also addresses multiple concerns in the house. So, you know, we can address the habitability aspects, we can address the structural aspects. It's often a lot quicker, particularly I think this point relates to post-disaster situations. You can move a lot faster when you don't have to worry about what land you're going to build on, how do you get that land ownership, how do you get all the utilities in, how do you get the infrastructure in, because generally that's there already. Or if there are issues with land, it can be integrated into the programs, which I'll talk about with one of our case studies in Colombia. Other short-term benefits are that for homeowners, it's a lot nicer. They don't have to move. They stay where they are. Their kids can keep going to the same schools. They live in, you know, you don't lose that sense of community because people are not moving. Then in terms of the longer term benefits, it's certainly effective for improving safety. We work a lot with very vulnerable, informally built housing, which, you know, at first glance might look completely useless, but it can be retrofit, and we've proven that it can be done and it can be effectively improved safety up to the standards of a new construction, if that's as far as you want to go with it. It also has the environmental benefits, because not only are you saving on all the waste of demolition of damaged existing housing, but you're also just putting less material into the house as you would if it were a new construction. It also supports urban densification. So again, another little stat from our recent cost study here was that upgrading a house to safely receive an additional story in the future, so expanding vertically, costs 35% of the average cost of building a new house. So much cheaper to just safely retrofit a 1 or a 2-story building, take another story, than building an equivalent multi-story building. And it's also a way, I think, to change embedded construction practices. So move people away from constantly focusing on new construction to just working with what you have, training the local market in terms of materials providers and construction professionals to just work with the existing buildings and improve them. So lots of benefits. So that's the kind of second key thing about build change. So we have the systems change approach of people, policy, money, and technology, and then we're also big on working with what exists already in the housing market. The third thing then is taking a homeowner-driven approach. So this simple graphic here just outlines what we mean by that. But really the essence is that we're putting the homeowner in control of the whole process. As you see here, we start with the homeowner. So everything begins with homeowner demand. And this might look like homeowners having the option to apply to a program, choosing to apply and then getting selected. It might look like a homeowner going to a bank to get a loan to do their housing improvement, or applying to a government subsidy program. And obviously then the next key step is, where's the money coming from for that? So as I said, it could be a loan, could be a micro loan, it could be blended. They could be contributing some of their own resources with a government subsidy, or it could be pure philanthropy. But so we have that demand, we have the money coming in then, and then we kind of come into the next few stages, which are perhaps the more traditional construction program stages where there's an assessment of the site to see if the house is appropriate, if the site's appropriate, does it have flood hazard or liquefaction hazard? No, great, okay, continue. And then different program eligibility things, depending on the different actors involved, moving through then the design, costing and approvals, but always keeping that feedback loop with homeowners, checking that the upgrades are what they need and what they want. And then once that design is complete, putting it back in the hands of the homeowner. So it's up to them to choose the builder they want to work with, hiring them, dealing with the contract with them, buying the materials or paying the builder to buy the materials, and then critically going through cash in transfers that are conditional on the quality. So we call this conditional cash plus technical assistance. So it's not good enough to just give the homeowners the cash and expect them to know what to do with it in terms of ensuring quality in the build. So I think anytime there's conditional cash, we're very big on ensuring that there's also a technical assistance aspect that runs in parallel with that. And so really, it's homeowner driven, but the homeowners are supported. They're not left out on their own to drive their own reconstruction process. And then at the end, of course, the resilient housing outcomes. And then the fourth and final aspect that I want to talk about of our approach within all these programs is that it needs to be holistic. So again, this is another graphic stolen from our cost study, which shows the average breakdown of how the money has been spent on average across all our projects. So in the grey is structural condition repairs. So repairing what exists, and then the blue is mitigation measures. So retrofitting, strengthening, ready for the next natural hazard. So you can see that together is about 2/3, but the remaining third is on habitability upgrades and finishings and growth. So habitability like I was saying before, is water sanitation, electricity, lighting, temperature, a whole host of things that make life good in your home. um, and then the green, finishings and growth. This is you know, painting the house, adding in nicer windows, but also making it stronger so that you can expand, so that you can add in that extra room to run your business, or you can add in an extra floor that you can rent out to get some extra income. So all of these critical aspects to resilient housing, you know, they're really reflected in the way we're spending money on programs. Okay, so that's the kind of build change approach to things, and certainly what we advocate for in all our programs as well as others programs. The way they've been applied in different programs has of course varied depending on who we're working with and how it's happened. So I wanted to just run through a few case studies to kind of give some examples of this. And I see there's lots going on in the chat, which I'm not looking at, but if you're asking questions, fantastic. Let me run through this.
We will leave it at the end. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll run through these 3 case studies and then we can dip back into questions. So I wanted to start with Haiti, because this was really where our retrofitting program began. So Build Change started working in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, and also had a response to Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And our programs over the period that we've been there, the 12 years now, have largely been post-disaster reconstruction in response to these 2 events, also the earthquake last year, so now sadly 3 events. But we have also done quite a lot of preventative work there. And the technical assistance, I was trying to find our numbers, but I could only find up to 2018, which was 3,600 households rebuilt or retrofit in Haiti with our technical assistance. And I think then kind of looking at Haiti and what we've done there across our 3 categories of people, policy, money, and technology. Haiti was an interesting one because when we started in 2010, there was no building code. And the last major earthquake was in the 1700s, I believe, which was well before the proliferation and use of concrete blocks. And so initially, you know, when we were looking on the technology side, very dense urban scenarios, a lot of badly damaged masonry buildings, but not irreparably damaged masonry buildings. And so we started to develop retrofitting techniques based on US codes. And really our approach was to just try and make them as simple as possible. You know, things that could be done with local materials and skills, and just distilling designs down to the most prescriptive thing possible. So kind of front loading all the engineering work initially by a group of core engineers, and then disseminating that to a much wider group in the form of prescriptive designs. Coming then onto the kind of people policy side, we ended up putting all of this into a retrofitting manual, which was used to train loads of engineers locally. And but then I think more importantly, that knowledge was then distilled even further into very simple picture guides. You can just about see a little image here of retrofitting a window, so that once we're on site, the builder, they're not even looking at plans, they're working purely with these picture guides. And then ultimately working very closely with the Ministry of Public Works to produce a national guide for retrofitting of buildings for earthquakes and hurricanes in the country. In terms of money then in Haiti, I think this little graph at the bottom I always like to show, because you know, transitional shelters were used so widely in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, but I think this shows just how expensive they are. I mean, they're more expensive than new construction. And depending on the level of intervention needed with the retrofit, whether it's a yellow tag building or a red tag building, transitional shelters might be as much as 4 times more expensive, 4 times more than the yellow, and they're about double the red retrofit. So it really is a cost-effective solution. And then in terms of what we found with the financing as we were implementing programs in Haiti was that it's a great way, using homeowner-driven approaches was a great way to introduce homeowners to the banking sector. In many cases, homeowners already had materials that they wanted to use, or they had some, they had ideas of what they wanted to do with their house. And so we were able to kind of, do deals almost like, okay, well, if you're willing to invest this, you want to make sure you have a second story, great, we can do that. We've got funding to contribute this. So that the end result is a safer home that the homeowner is happy with and well invested in. And then a final learning from Haiti on the money side was that because we generally found several families living within one building, assigning subsidies based on families rather than the building meant that for the bigger buildings there was more money available as needed. Alongside all of this, I think one of our most exciting programs in Haiti, or kind of most impactful programs, was a lot of the training work we did. So we had a worksite skills lab set up where there was sort of different stages of construction all going on one site, and builders could drop in to work on their reinforcement tying, or work on their carpentry, or work on their block laying, and kind of gradually tick off skills to then get certified in all of those different aspects, which then gave homeowners the opportunity to say, okay, well, I've seen that this builder is certified. Similarly, working with block manufacturers to try and improve the kind of quality assurance and quality control of blocks that were coming out of factories, and again introducing a certification system so that homeowners know the better places to buy their materials. So using retrofitting programs and using homeowner-driven programs as a way to enhance other elements of the construction value chain, so that there's kind of wider impact rather than just that one housing program. Coming then to our next case study, and I'm conscious I'm kind of trying to compress about 15-year programs into a single slide with these, but I've got some links to additional resources, and of course please reach out if you have want more information on anything in particular at the end. But so in Colombia, I think is an interesting one because it's purely preventative. There hasn't been a large earthquake in Colombia for a while, although there is a huge risk. So 77% of the existing population is living in urban areas, and about 60% of the units in urban areas are low rise, unreinforced masonry, and highly vulnerable to earthquakes. So I think the quality of construction, particularly in the informal neighborhoods of Colombia, is very, very low because they have quite frequent but very small intensity earthquakes. People have this kind of idea of safety, but the reality is that they haven't had a big one for a while, and there really is a lack of awareness of how vulnerable they are. And so initially, when we first started working in the country, a lot of public policy was really around new construction. There was building codes completely ignored the enormous informal sector and the vulnerability in that sector. There was no code for retrofitting or building improvement or regularization of the informal sector. And so a lot of our work in Colombia has really been about both working top down, but also bottom up to try and change that situation. And it's taken some time, but I think we're making good progress in that we now have, or the government of Colombia now has national and local programs that are all about retrofitting and improving informal housing in the country. So the national program Casa Digna Vida Digna, as you can see, is working in a number of cities now around. Initially, there are kind of 3 levels to that program. Initially, a lot of it was going to be about purely habitability improvements, no structural improvements. We were able to change that and say there's really no house in Colombia that informal house that only needs habitability improvements. Every single informal house is going to be vulnerable to a certain extent structurally. So we were able to get some simple retrofitting, structural strengthening, retrofitting measures into all of their programs. The program that they have going in Bogota, Plan Terrazas, is an exciting one. It's all about expansion, so retrofitting the first floor of a home to be able to safely take a second floor or even a third story in the future. And again, our approach here was similar to what we did in Haiti in terms of the technology that we tried to create a retrofitting manual that did not exist. So pouring all of our retrofitting knowledge into a manual that was as simple as possible and as prescriptive as possible, so that really it can be scaled as quickly as possible to try and address this urgent need. That is now in the process of becoming national code in Colombia, which is incredibly exciting with the Association of Seismic Engineers. And then finally, on the money side, the money in Colombia has really all come from public subsidies. So it's generally all government led programs, and that's been both blended national and local financing, as well as a lot from the city. I think another exciting progress with our programs there is that it's really starting to be widely acknowledged that these programs are a success. The pilots have been proven, they're working at scale, and I think that's well reflected in the World Bank loan that was signed last year for $100 million to support the Casa Digna Vida Digna program, amongst others. Finally, then, third case study is the Philippines, and this is really the one I know least about. But I wanted to show it because I think it's an interesting contrast, particularly after talking about Haiti and Colombia, is where so much is public money led. In the Philippines, because there's already such a strong institution group with microfinancing institutions, we're exploring how to engage the private sector and how to engage private sector lending for resilience. And so this has kind of brought on a whole new level of technology challenges, in that, again, the Philippines is slightly different in that there are good building codes there. The problem really is with the enforcement of them, but the codes are there, and so putting that into simple tools that can be used by loan officers and putting the responsibility of ensuring the quality in the hands of loan officers has been an interesting challenge. And as you can see there, it kind of gives an example, again, trying to make everything very simple, very graphic, so that the homeowners and the loan officers can do the assessment themselves, and the tool will then spit out different retrofitting options in the form of packages, so the homeowner can choose based on what loan they're eligible for, the loan size they're eligible for, what package they want to go ahead with. To complement this, we tried to do quite a lot of work with awareness raising to raise demand for these sorts of strengthening programs. And in terms of working with the MFIs, certainly the MFIs are all very interested, but for them to get the wholesale financing has also been a challenge. but there's a huge potential. A study we did a few years ago indicated that there are about 15 million, I think it's 15.5 million vulnerable homes across all sectors in the Philippines, so both high-end, middle income, as well as low-income homes. But the 8.5 million, so well over half of them, can be served by microfinance institutions. So again, really, it made sense in the Philippines to try this private sector approach. So as I said, I've crammed a lot into 3 slides there with the case studies. In terms of additional resources, there's a ton of stuff on our website, which I'd invite you all to take a look at and download. The 2 main guides I think that are worth highlighting are, first of all, the Build Change Guide to Resilient Housing. That includes a lot more background and much more eloquently put than I've described of those first 4 slides that I showed, describing Build Change's general approach. And then there's a lot more information on our findings from the cost study in this Cost of Improving Vulnerable Housing. Then there's also lots of retrofit manuals, technical things, training materials, hazard awareness, some primers on homeowner-driven construction that we did for USAID, all on the website too. So please, yeah, take a look. And that is everything from me. But let me open up the chat and see the questions, or Elis, do you want to lead on coordinating questions?
And I don't think that there were like that many questions in the chat. I mean, I did have a question that I was mostly, but I think that it was kind of answered, because in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of like, I guess, prioritizing in a way, like building new housing, new construction, but we have like lots of vacant housing. And part of it is that it is, you know, it is abandoned. It's not in the sense that you cannot find the owner, which makes it complicated to actually be able to rehab those homes, even though it might be like even cheaper to do that, right? And it will actually restore some of the historic downtown areas and more sustainable and so on. But I was wondering, maybe if you probably don't do it either, right? Because it's the difficulties of it. There's a lot of legal difficulties associated with it. So it seems like it would be just, from your perspective, I would work with homeowners willing to participate, obviously, in the program.
Yeah, in general, yes. And I think from what we've seen, if the house has been abandoned, it's because the homeowner has another option. And so while there's, in terms of technically, it would be a fantastic option for retrofitting, but it's perhaps not the top priority in terms of the people most in need. So yeah, the same with us. It's not been our main focus. In terms of getting land regularization, that, as I said, the program in Colombia has quite successfully, I think, paired the legal process with the technical process. So we've managed to kind of get the 2 government departments talking, so that you know, acknowledging that nobody legally built there in the first place. They don't own the land, they don't own the house legally, they don't have the papers. But if you say no to everybody, then you're not going anywhere. So to be able to pair the 2 programs has been really successful.
Yeah, thank you. I think that Rob has his hand up.
Yeah, let me see. Let me get it down. There we go. So I'm particularly intrigued by Colombia example, I think with regard to Puerto Rico, what caught my attention very positively was talking about making the resilient housing manual public policy. And, I really like your, holistic approach to resilient housing. So that sounds very appealing. But that said, let's just say I'm suspicious. There's an inherent contradiction between your approach and anything that's government led. And, and I think of other places. I think of, and you got the World Bank giving, millions of dollars. I think of Turkey, which has the World Bank giving millions of dollars for, seismic improvement, which is, it's a very top-down, redevelopment approach that displaces lots of people. And I think of, actually some very well-intentioned programs in the US and in Puerto Rico that get mired in bureaucracy and turn into horror stories. And so I would like to think that you've solved some of these things in Colombia, and that maybe the clever ways in which you've solved them could be adapted to Puerto Rico. I mean, it feels like something we ought to be able to do. So that's kind of a big question. Maybe you can refer us to other resources on what you're doing, or maybe there's some particular challenges that have been overcome in Colombia that might be useful lessons for us. So whatever you can say on that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. No. Great question. It's a constant challenge and a constant battle. In terms of referring to other resources, I would say we go into the Colombia case study in quite a lot of depth in the guide to resilient housing that's on the website. So definitely take a look at that. What I will say, I think so far what we found is that we can't leave yet. In terms of, we haven't found a way to remove ourselves from the situation. So there's still a need for a third party to always be there, to be ensuring that the technical assistance aspect is never taken away from a program. So like, yes, the World Bank are coming in, they're giving money, the government are there, they're giving money. That's great, the financing is there, the homeowner is there. But generally what we've seen with other programs that tend to fail is when the technical assistance gets removed, because that's when programs start to go more towards quick numbers that look good for statistics, and just purely habitability improvements, so no structural improvements, because it's nice to put in a new bathroom or new roof that doesn't leak. Nobody wants to pay generally for the structural things, because it's like going to the dentist to have your tooth out. Like, it's something you have to have done, but it just costs money, and it's not what you want to spend the money on. You don't notice the immediate improvements of it. And so to answer your question, the way we've had to do it is for us to always be there to make sure that continues to happen, and that element is always there. And our team is small, but Change is not a big organization. Most of the work we do is through training of others. Like, our team in Colombia is like 10 people, but they've trained 200 government officials in Bogota to be working on this. But without our 10 people, I think it's hard. So I don't think we fully have the answer yet, because we still feel that we need to be there. But maybe for now, that's enough of an answer, is that you need that third party ensuring the technical assistance is there and is good quality.
Yeah, maybe another way of looking at that is, we often talk about the importance of partnerships between NGOs and governments. And I always think of it in terms of the government providing resources so the NGOs can do the work that they do really well. So I think that's one way, but you've just described another way also, which is also the NGOs helping to improve the knowledge and capacity of government officials as well. But still the point is it requires both. You can't just create a policy and walk away. So that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Mhm.
Other questions? Yes, Lucila. I think you're muted, Lucila.
I so appreciate the systems approach, and it's a complex system. It's so important that this be understood from the beginning. All these factors are, you've got people, money, and technology, and you start with people, which is great and to be definitely applauded. You don't start with the money. And in Puerto Rico, we have a very important component in this system is the land. And I'm sure you've heard about the community land trust we have in Caño Martín Peña. And so rather than dissociate the housing improvement from the land, they said we're going to solve the land problem at the same time that we're looking at. Land is an important component of this whole system we're trying to improve. So I think that, and I think the land situation is probably is a vulnerable component in many places throughout the world. So I was particularly, in Haiti, I know that it was handled in different ways. So I think what you're doing is terrific. And I think there are opportunities everywhere to apply the system and to identify what are the critical components in this model at the beginning is very important. You can't, it's really, if you're dealing with housing improvement with this approach, that it's better to rehabilitate on site if possible in the long run. I thought that was very good presentation. What are the critical components that you have to be making part of the whole plan from the beginning? So thank you.
Thank you. No, thanks for all that feedback. So was there a question in there, like what are the critical components?
Well, that was really a comment on the good work you're doing, and keep it up. But I do think that what you presented was a simplified presentation of the model, because I was asking if you have a methodology for identifying what are the critical elements within the whole system that have to be identified in the beginning, besides people, technology, and money. In Puerto Rico, we know that a critical element is land and title to the land.
Absolutely. I think it varies so much project to project. Again, I'll as I know we're getting short on time as well, I'll direct you to our guide for resilient housing. It goes into a lot more detail of the different components within people, money, and technology.
Are there any other questions? Well, people think of questions. Well, there's a question there.
I had a small question about local
Yes.
materials. I was really interested to see that local materials were used. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what they were.
Yeah, definitely. So I think when we say local materials, we don't always mean anything sexy or sophisticated. We literally mean what people are building with. So in Colombia, or in Bogota, the photo I have on the screen here is of the bricks that the vast majority of informal neighborhoods are built out of. And these bricks were, they're not great. They're fired in horrible processes, and they were never designed to be load-bearing bricks. They're full of holes. They're really brittle. They have very little strength, but they're cheap, and so they're what almost everybody uses to build with. So in Bogota, when we say local materials, we mean these bricks and the reinforced concrete that comes with them, because that's the reality. That's what everybody's using. That's what everybody knows. That's what everyone has access to. So finding ways to improve the structural resistance of this, and if possible, the sustainability of this. Similarly, like in Haiti, in the urban areas of Port-au-Prince that we were working in, everyone was building with concrete hollow units. Again, not a sexy material, not a trendy local material, but it's what everybody's using, and it's what everybody knows. So if we want to change the embedded construction practices, then we need to start with that. You know, in the Philippines, where timber construction is much more prevalent, and then there we work with timber, but it's really just looking at what people are already using, and trying to improve the quality and the sustainability of that.
Thank you.
Yes, Federico, I see your box, but I'm not sure if you want to ask a question.
No, the only point is about in Puerto Rico, do you have to comply with the International Building Code? And the government is in the position that all new construction and rehabilitation need to comply with the code. I don't know how, if you apply your methodology in some place like Puerto Rico, that is like USA in that sense. I don't know how do you manage this situation.
Yes, good question. We have worked in various different ways in different places. In some cases, we are doing small enough interventions that we don't need to comply with local codes. In others, we do. So in Colombia, there's an enormous amount of bureaucracy, I would say, in terms of building compliance. And so the agreement that we've come to with local building municipalities there is that work we're doing to existing buildings, so if we're working on a one-story building, that first story does have to be in compliance with the building code there, and we're preparing full drawing packages that are submitted for planning approval. But then when we're saying we're retrofitting, well, there is no code, and so that was part of the reason that we decided we needed to get our manual approved as a code in the